Welcome back, and Owen's here for a business update. Hello again. Owen, starting with the markets, and the Nikkei is leading a stalled start to the week's trading.
Yeah, always the same, it seems, in the run-up to these EU summits. This one happens to take place on a Monday. They tend to be at the end of the week. It doesn't matter. Everyone gets nervous before these because there's so much on the agenda, as per usual. And as per usual, going into these summits, the Asian markets have started the week a little bit depressed. The Nikkei finishing the day's trading just a short time ago, around 0.5% off. The Hang Seng is still trading, racking up more losses, close to 1% off the mark as well. And you can see there the Kospi taking the brunt of the day's losses, around 1.5% down. All jitters about what exactly these EU leaders may or may not decide later on today.
Now, one man setting out his stall was French President Nicolas Sarkozy. His primetime address on Sunday evening was all but a manifesto for a second term. It includes some contentious issues like raising VAT to fund radical labour reforms. But Sarkozy also put himself on a collision course with some of the world's biggest financial centres by imposing a tax on financial transactions. Yuka Roya has more.
The French president devoted most of his hour-long interview to explain his plans for boosting the country's economy. He stressed new taxes will be needed to fill state coffers, even if they're controversial.
We have also finally decided to create a tax on financial transactions. We hope it will raise €1 billion a year for the government budget and help reduce the deficit. What we want is to trigger a shock and set an example.
He said such a tax would make banks pay for the financial crisis they brought about. Britain has vetoed the idea of an EU-wide financial transaction tax. Sarkozy says France is ready to introduce the 0.1% tax anyway on French shares, a measure that could put Paris market at risk. The French president also set out a plan for the so-called social VAT, a raise in sales tax to fund a reduction in private firms' social contributions. It's another controversial idea as it makes consumers pay for retirement and other social benefits. Sarkozy said the measure would help increase jobs and also said the notorious 35-hour work week system should be changed. The president said the new taxes would save €13 billion and help boost the country's growth. Despite the recent downward revision of growth and credit downgrade, Sarkozy said France was on track to meeting its target for budget deficit reduction this year.
So, talk of budget reduction there or deficit for France, and its budget deficit's at the heart of a new row between Germany and Greece.
Yeah, that blew up over the weekend. This was the economy minister in Angela Merkel's German government suggesting that maybe the EU, maybe Germany, we're not quite sure, should basically take over the reins of the Greek budget. That's because they say that this country, despite one bailout, despite the arrival, regular arrival of IMF, EU inspectors and so on, that this country just has not got a grip on its finances. We're seeing public debt going up and up. This country really facing going to the wall unless it can radically bring down its budget deficits. That met with a very, very stern rebuke, particularly from the Greek finance minister over the weekend, basically saying we do not need other countries or indeed other organisations coming in and taking full control of our budgets, although you could argue that with the Troika there now, they do have some degree of control over the way Greece's finances are going.
And the Greeks do appear to be closing in on a deal with those creditors.
Yeah, at least on the sidelines of all of that row over the weekend, we saw these negotiators, representatives of private investors back in Greece, and they say they're edging closer and closer to a comprehensive deal. Remember, it's all about these private investors being willing to write off some of their investments to try and save the Greek government around €100 billion. That involves basically a bond swap, replacing current bonds with new ones, all to try and relieve the pressure on the Greek government, which, remember, has around €14 billion of debt maturing mid-March. So the clock is really ticking on this country. They have to get this deal in place, certainly by the latest within the next couple of weeks or so, to meet the demands of that bond maturity. And that's something that they'll want to try and get wrapped up at this EU summit later this Monday. Just while we're talking that, it is a busy day in the Eurozone. When is it not, though? Where we've got that EU summit in Brussels. That starts at around 2 p.m. Paris time. We'll, of course, follow that for you here on France France 24. You've also got as well Italy auctioning off around €8 billion worth of bonds of between 5 and 10 years maturity. Italian bond yields have been going down just a little bit, so this will be a big test of confidence to see whether that course does continue for the Italians. And of course, that Greek deal as well, we're expecting an announcement on that. Remember, it's all about meeting the terms of a new €130 billion bailout for Greece, which they absolutely have to have in place.
So you've got some more of the day's business headlines for us now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, let's pick up on a few more of the day's headlines for you. Royal Bank of Scotland Chief Executive Stephen Hester, has waived a shares bonus worth nearly £1 million. Hester's bonus, on top of a £1.2 million basic salary, had caused a political storm in the UK, where RBS is more than 80% owned by the government. The bank has shed tens of thousands of jobs since the bailout in 2008.
Iran has given mixed signals about its position over the West's oil embargo over the disputed nuclear program. The country's oil minister says exports to the EU will stop soon, though without specifying a date. But lawmakers have postponed a debate on halting deliveries to the EU in retaliation for an embargo due to come into effect in July.
And Carrefour has sacked its chief executive. That's according to Bloomberg sources. It's understood the French supermarket chain replaced Lars Olofsson with Vivarti CEO Georges Plassard at a board meeting here in Paris on Sunday. Carrefour has lost around €7 billion in market value since Olofsson took over 4 years ago with a string of underperforming results.
Now, the soaring value of the Swiss franc last year was good for currency traders like the wife of the former head of the Swiss Central Bank. But it was a difficult period for exporters whose goods suddenly became more expensive. And yet, against this trend, Swiss watchmakers are celebrating a record year, with exports up 20%. Victoria Morgan reports on the enduring appeal of a Swiss timepiece.
Switzerland's watchmakers greet the new year with their newest collections. Diamonds are usual on watches this expensive. Across town, independent watchmakers know that to carve a name, you need to be different. This watch includes tiny pieces of Mars and Mercury. Some watches give you a glimpse inside. More than one chronograph is another tactic, and this watch has sapphire workings so thin, they're transparent.
Exports of Swiss watches were up 20% last year. Just what is the secret behind this industry?
I mean, people want to know that it's made in Switzerland. They like the heritage, they like the history that comes with it. Everything is handmade in-house, so there's no parts that are made elsewhere. This watch is 49,000 Swiss francs plus the tax.
With such detailed work and such high price tags, it's not surprising that clients come from all over the world. 2011 saw exports to Europe down, but to Asia, they were up more than 50% on 2009.
Exports are very important. We export almost all of our watches. Last year, one of the problems was the positioning of the Swiss franc. It's very difficult now that it's been sort of back to a more normalized rate and maintained by the Swiss bank. That's a big help to us.
A strong Swiss franc makes Swiss watches more expensive, though this one, at 240,000 francs, is never going to be cheap.
Of course, if you can't quite stretch to those prices, there is perhaps another, more extreme solution.
But you run a bit of a risk, and it certainly won't help export figures.
A light-fingered Victoria Morgan reporting there from Switzerland. She did tell me, though, she didn't steal that watch. She does assure us. Just time to tell you, Claire, before we go, we'll have more on the whole EU summit on our next bulletin just after 9:15 Paris time. We'll be talking to PIMCO's Philippe Bodereau. He's a bond expert and, he's an all-round expert, really, and he's one of these clever guys who knows a lot about everything. We'll be talking to him about the EU summit, the prospects for Greece, and, of course, the wider concern about exactly where the EU's going in terms of budget reform and actually that whole fiscal compact, as they call it.
That's coming up in your next bulletin. All right, thanks very much, Owen, for that look at the day's business news. Do stay tuned to France 24, all the latest headlines coming up in just a few minutes with Stuart Norval.